The storm had long passed, but the mountains still held their breath. Mist clung to the slopes like a secret, and beneath its gauze, Captain Elara Voss lay still among the rocks, her rifle braced against a fallen pine. Every inhale was measured, every heartbeat a whisper in the silence. Through her scope, she tracked faint thermal flickers on the ridge beyond, patterns not made by wildlife. They were searching for her again. 3 days ago, they'd come from the sky. The first reports called them scouts, humanoid, armored, their speech laced with static that seemed both alien and mocking. By nightfall, half her recon unit was gone. Now Elara was the last, hunted by something that enjoyed the chase more than the kill. The alien officer had a name, or what passed for one, Sarek. His voice echoed in the valley hours earlier, distorted and amplified through the air like a taunt. Human predator, he had said. You fight alone. Why persist? Elara had not answered then. She didn't speak to ghosts, and Sarek would be one soon enough. She adjusted her sight, noting the faint shimmer of movement below the ridgeline. They were learning, spreading out instead of marching in the open. She respected that, even as she hated it. Survival demanded respect for the enemy. It was the only way to stay alive long enough to end them. The mountain air was thin, biting at her lungs. Her stomach growled quietly, but she ignored it. Hunger was trivial compared to the ache of loss. Her team, Rico, Halvorsen, Mina, faces burned in her memory like embers that refused to die. They'd fought until their weapons ran dry. The last sound she remembered from them wasn't gunfire. It was laughter, defiant and human. She carried that sound now as a kind of armor. Her earpiece crackled, a faint burst of static, then a voice low, synthetic and almost playful. You run well, Captain, almost like one of us. Elara's lips tightened. She didn't respond, though her finger brushed the trigger guard reflexively. Sarek wanted her attention, wanted the psychological game. That told her he wasn't bored yet. Her mind replayed the brief encounter from the first night. The blue light cutting through the forest, the shimmer of armor, and that strange metallic scent after plasma fire. She'd wounded one of them. Not Sarek, someone subordinate. It had screamed in a soundless way, its body unraveling into motes of light as if reality had rejected it. Sarek had watched, then spoken through the dark. You should not have done that. Now, Elara smirked faintly at the memory. You shouldn't have come here, she whispered, words lost to the wind. She shifted position, crawling backward through the rocks until she reached a narrow cleft that overlooked a steep drop. Below, the remnants of a crashed drone lay broken in the snow. If she could salvage its power core, she might build a signal booster. But movement on the treeline stopped her. Tall figures cloaked in silver refracted light. 3 of them, silent and deliberate. Sarek wasn't among them. These were scouts, expendable. Elara steadied her breath, lined up the first one through her scope, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the valley, the recoil firm against her shoulder. The figure convulsed, then collapsed soundlessly, its form distorting before fading entirely. The other 2 turned sharply, one firing a beam that sliced through a nearby pine, showering sparks and resin. She rolled, found cover, and returned fire, hitting the second in the chest. The third retreated, vanishing into the fog. The silence that followed was heavier than before, charged with anticipation. Then Sarek's voice returned, deeper now, tinged with something almost human. Interesting. You learn quickly, perhaps too quickly. Elara smiled coldly, eyes narrowing toward the ridge. That's the thing about humans, she murmured, reloading with steady hands. We adapt. In the distance, thunder rolled again. Not from the sky this time, but from engines awakening deep within the valley. Sarek was coming himself, and Elara was done running. Elara moved before the echoes of gunfire fully died, sliding downslope with practiced urgency, boots finding stone by instinct rather than sight. The aliens would triangulate the shots quickly. They always did. What they never anticipated was how little distance mattered to a human who understood terrain as an ally rather than an obstacle. She reached the treeline and slowed, letting the forest swallow her presence. Needles muffled her steps, and the cold earth accepted her weight without complaint. She paused only long enough to mask her trail, scattering loose soil and dragging a fallen branch across her path. It was not cleverness that kept her alive, but discipline earned through repetition and loss. Hours passed in fragments of motion and stillness. Elara climbed when the slopes steepened, descended when sensors would favor high ground, and waited whenever patience promised better odds than speed. Her mind remained quiet, focused on breath, muscle tension, and sound. Fear existed, but she had learned to store it away like a ration, spent only when necessary. By nightfall, alien search patterns became visible to her. Pulses of pale light swept the valleys at measured intervals, methodical and overconfident. They assumed the hunt was symmetrical, predator against predator. Elara knew better. Humans endured because they accepted asymmetry, embraced imbalance, and turned weakness into leverage. She scavenged as she moved, stripping a fallen drone of wiring and a cracked power cell, stuffing the pieces into her pack. The technology was unfamiliar, but purpose translated easily enough. Energy flowed, circuits closed, and tools could be persuaded to serve new masters. Her father's voice echoed faintly in memory, teaching her to fix engines with scavenged parts on a frontier world that had never known peace. A sharp scent of ozone warned her seconds before danger. Elara flattened as a plasma bolt hissed overhead, striking a boulder where her head had been moments earlier. She rolled, came up firing, not to kill but to mislead. Her shot shattered a sensor node, plunging a stretch of forest into electronic blindness. She vanished into it immediately, heart steady despite the chaos she left behind. From a distant ridge, Sarek observed the disruption with narrowing eyes. This was no panic prey. The human moved with intention, reshaping the battlefield instead of reacting to it. Sarek issued clipped orders, frustration bleeding into his tone despite himself. His kind valued control above all else, and control was slipping. Elara felt that shift long before she understood it. The hunt was changing. The pressure behind her movements eased, replaced by something heavier, more deliberate. Sarek was adapting now, abandoning theatrics in favor of pursuit. She welcomed it. Arrogance was dangerous, but focus made enemies predictable. She reached a narrow ravine carved by meltwater and crouched at its edge, assembling her salvage device with numb fingers. The improvised beacon hummed to life, emitting a distorted signal that mimicked her earlier position. She wedged it beneath a rock and retreated upslope, breath fogging the air. When the first alien patrol converged on the false signal, Elara watched from above, rifle steady but finger off the trigger. She let them search, let confusion fracture their formation, let Sarek see inefficiency where certainty should have been. This was not about bodies. It was about doubt. As she melted back into the forest, the mountains seemed to close around her, vast and indifferent. Elara allowed herself a single, thin smile. For the first time since the crash, she was no longer being chased. She was deciding where the chase would go next. The rules were finally hers alone, now, forever. Night had fallen like a shroud, heavy and soundless. The mountain was no longer a landscape. It had become a labyrinth of shadows and echoes. Elara moved through it with the precision of instinct, every step a calculation. The temperature had dropped sharply, her breath forming pale ghosts in the air. She could still smell the residue of the alien plasma from the earlier fight, a metallic tang that clung to the earth. Somewhere above, Sarek's ship pulsed faintly, its beacon bleeding blue light through the fog. He was here now, closer than ever. Elara crouched beside a cluster of rocks and retrieved a half-char data core from the down drone. She'd been working on it between firefights, scavenging energy cells, wiring scraps of her rifle's targeting system into its interface. Now the makeshift device blinked weakly, the faint rhythm of survival. It wasn't just a beacon anymore, it was bait. Sarek wanted the hunt. She would give him one. She had begun to understand him in ways she hadn't expected. Sarek wasn't driven by conquest or duty. His transmissions revealed fragments of curiosity, almost admiration for the humans who refused to yield. "Your persistence fascinates me," he had said during one brief interception. "You're fragile things that pretend at fury." His words had angered her then, but now she heard something else beneath them: loneliness. For all his superiority, Sarek hunted because he needed to prove that something still feared him. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Elara climbed higher, using the ridge's frozen spine as a vantage point. The stars above were distorted by the thin veil of atmosphere, alien themselves in their clarity. Somewhere down the valley, a faint hum vibrated through the rocks. The ship's engines had quieted, but something else moved, steady, deliberate steps that crunched in the frost. Sarek had abandoned his armor's cloaking, perhaps as a gesture of confidence, perhaps challenge. She peered through her scope, adjusting for wind, and finally saw him. He was taller than she remembered, humanoid but wrong in the angles, his armor glinting like liquid steel. A faint light pulsed from beneath his collar, marking his life's signature in sharp rhythm. He walked with the composure of a predator that knows its prey is cornered. Elara exhaled, lowering her rifle. This wasn't the time to shoot. She needed him closer, needed to draw him into the clearing where her trap waited. The beacon now emitting a faint energy signal mimicking human biosigns. It was a cruel trick, but war had long stripped her of gentler instincts. Minutes stretched into hours, or maybe they just felt that way. The sound of Sarek's movement grew nearer until it was no longer distant but personal, a presence behind the fog. Alara's pulse matched the rhythm of his steps. She lay still, waiting for him to step into the narrow hollow between the boulders. When he did, she whispered into the open channel, "You want a persistence. Here it is." Sarek froze. For a heartbeat, there was no sound at all. Then, slowly his head turned toward her voice. "You are the last," he said, his tone unreadable. "Why not surrender?" "Because surrender isn't human," she replied. She triggered the detonator. The hidden charges buried in the snow erupted, the concussive blast lighting the night in silver flame. The shockwave hurled Sarek backward, his armor flaring as energy shields tried and failed to compensate. Elara ducked behind cover, deafened, dust filling her lungs. When the smoke cleared, she saw him struggling to stand, one arm sparking violently. She approached cautiously, rifle leveled. Sarek's gaze met hers through the cracked visor. Even wounded, there was defiance in his stance. "Impressive," he rasped. "But you misunderstand. This was never about capture." A low hum built in the air. His armor began to glow, not with weapon power, but something deeper, an energy pulse that reached into the ground itself. The mountains trembled faintly. Elara felt the realization hit her like ice. He hadn't come to hunt her. He had come to signal something worse. Before she could react, the horizon flared with alien light. The alien light faded as abruptly as it had come, leaving the valley trembling and silent once more. Elara steadied herself against the rock, forcing her breathing to slow as she assessed the damage. Sarek lay several meters away, armor fractured, the glow beneath it dimming in uneven pulses. Whatever signal he had attempted to send had failed, cut short by her charges in the unstable terrain. The mountain had answered first, and it did not favor him. She approached without haste, weapon trained, eyes never leaving his hands. Sarek struggled to rise, then stopped, clearly understanding the futility. For the first time since she had encountered him, his posture slackened, authority draining away with the flickering light of his suit. Up close, his form seemed less imposing, more fragile than she had expected. "You are persistent beyond logic," he said quietly. There was no mockery left in his voice, only tired curiosity. "Your species should not endure. Yet you do." Elara kept her rifle steady. "We don't survive because we should," she replied. "We survive because we refuse not to." Sarek considered that, his head tilting slightly. "This world was meant to be a lesson," he said. "Fear breeds compliance. Your kind responded with defiance instead." "Fear taught us how to adapt," Elara said. "You mistook that for weakness." Wind swept through the ravine, carrying ice and ash in equal measure. Sarek's armor sparked again, then went dark entirely. He exhaled, a sound too human for comfort, and slumped against the stone. Without the suit support, he looked smaller, diminished by gravity and failure. "You have altered the calculus," he admitted. "Others will learn from this encounter." "That's the idea," Elara said. She fired once. The shot was precise, merciful, final. Sarek's body went still, dissolving slowly into motes of pale light that drifted upward and vanished into the fog. Elara lowered her rifle and stood there for several long seconds, listening for any sign that the hunt would resume. None came. The mountains seemed to exhale. At dawn, the sky cleared enough to reveal contrails cutting across the horizon. Human dropships descended in controlled arcs, engines roaring with familiar defiance. Elara activated her beacon at last, a clean signal this time, and watched as friendly signatures bloomed across her display. Relief washed over her, quiet but profound. A med officer reached her first, hands steady as they checked for injuries. "You held them off alone?" he asked, disbelief plain in his voice. Elara nodded once. "They underestimated the terrain," she said. "And us." Later, wrapped in a thermal blanket at the edge of the landing zone, she watched the ships lift away again, carrying the remains of alien technology for study and warning. Command would analyze everything, assign classifications and threat levels, write doctrines meant to prevent this from happening again. She hoped they would remember this simple lesson too. When asked for her report, Elara kept it brief. "They thought the chase defined strength," she said. "They forgot what happens when the hunted decides to stop running." The officer recording her words paused, then smiled faintly. As the sun rose higher, casting gold across the battered mountainside, Elara finally allowed herself to rest. The war was far from over. Encounters like this would repeat across worlds and generations. But somewhere out there, alien commanders would remember this valley and hesitate. Humans had been chased for most of their history. Now they chased back, and the universe was beginning to understand why.